Hey everyone, and welcome to our ConnectWise Managed Service Certification Series. My name is Renee Bergstresser, and I'm a software training consultant with our education department. I'll be joined a little bit later by my pal Dylan Baxter, who will be presenting half of this with me. But we're going to take the next couple of sessions over the next 2.5 weeks to go through all of our content that we think you'll need to become service power users with Manage. As kind of a quick introductory high level, for those of you who signed up for the certification, if you've been certified in the past, this is going to look a little different. We, instead of saying associate, expert, professional, we actually broke out our certification series into more role-based certifications. The one that you are enrolled in right now that you're viewing is our service certification. We also have ones for sales and finance. But what we'll be doing is we'll be looking at services within Manage kind of holistically, and we're going to try to build up through the next couple sessions from the very beginnings of getting into the service desk within Manage, all the way up into running a really mature organization and taking full advantage of all the features that Manage has to offer you. That's something that I think will be really beneficial about this program, is that we're going to try to start everybody off on the same page, make sure that we have the great groundwork laid for services, and then we're going to slowly work up and build on what we've learned. Once we get to the end, this may be the content that you really need, but now you've recapped everything with the service desk, make sure you're up on the new enhancements, all that good stuff. And for those of you who aren't quite ready for those last sessions, the high maturity type information, you can still make plans for what you'll do in the future. And we're hoping it'll be really beneficial for you as you move through and start to pursue more mature operational settings. For kind of the housekeeping part of this, that's our purpose and our goal for this next 10 hours we're going to spend together. We're going to meet on Mondays and Wednesdays. We'll have 5 sessions total, so Monday, Wednesday, and then a final Monday. We'll meet from 1:30 Eastern Time to 3:30. We'll take the first hour to cover one specific topic, and then we'll go on a brief 10-minute break, and then we'll bring on another presenter for the last hour for an additional topic. So that way we'll cover 2 topics a day, but you'll have some time to breathe in between. In the Adobe Connect room, this is really going to be the best way for us to communicate during this whole certification series. So definitely get familiar with the room and know which settings would be important for you to use. 2 that I'd want to call out right now, one being our Q&A pod. This is going to be the best place to get in touch with us. If you're confused, if you think we need to cover additional things in the content, maybe something didn't quite make sense, we should go over it again, please just mention that in the Q&A pod and we can go through and help you out as best we can. Whichever of us is not presenting will be moderating throughout the entire session, so someone will be here to help you out and look at your questions. We're also going to try to link to as many helpful resources as possible throughout in the additional resources pod within the Adobe Connect room. It should be the one right below my face. So there we'll have links to educational materials, maybe additional coursework, etc. Anything that we think would be really helpful for you moving through the certification. At the very end of it, we want to prepare you for an exam so that you can say that you are ConnectWise Managed Service certified. So we hope you all stick it out with us. We'll ask some questions throughout to try and make sure that that exam is a breeze for you and you can get this cert. Without further ado, our first session, the first topic that we want to tackle in this service certification is time and tracking. Time is probably one of the most fundamental concepts within Manage. If we can track our time appropriately, everything else throughout the system, as we move up, as we become more mature, as we scale, becomes so much easier, and our reporting becomes so much more useful to us if we can kind of nail this one. So we want this to be our first topic because it really is one of the most important for us to understand up front. When we're looking at time, 2 settings that we're going to need to pay close attention to are work role and work type. They can cause some confusion, but if you can kind of separate them in your mind and create the appropriate settings for each to represent the roles that your team members are in and the ways you would like those roles to be changed, maybe upcharges, etc., time and a half through our work type, it'll make calculating bills for your customers so much easier, and you won't have to go in and make so many manual adjustments or worry about micromanaging your team's time. So that's a huge one. We'll cover that first. Then we'll get into identifying what time needs to be tracked. What needs to show up and Manage? What do we need to have on a timesheet for our approvals process every week? We'll get into our recommended practices for recording time on service tickets. We've covered, we'll cover how critically important it is for our technicians to enter time. When we're thinking about how important it is for our team to enter time, we really want to make sure that we focus a lot of our attention on the easiest ways for them to do so. What's going to fit in best with their workflow? What's going to track their time the most accurately? So we'll cover a couple different options in there as well. Everything from more traditional time entry to using something like a stopwatch feature for specific situations. And then lastly, we're just going to do a brief review of completing your weekly timesheets and reviewing those timesheets, just so that we see how a member would go in, check what's going on with their timesheets, easy ways for them to spot out things that could be a potential issue, managing to those exceptions in their timesheets, and then submit these to their admins. And also, how would an admin communicate with a team member that something needs to change? What's the best way to do that? What do we recommend? So we'll cover all of this today. To start off, we're going to get into a business case that I'm sure a lot of you can relate to. You have technicians' hours being billed at different rates depending on either what they're doing, or who they are. If it's completed remotely or on-site, it might have a different billing rate and might have to bill differently. How do we make this easy for your team to where they're just entering their time and then it's automatically calculating based on where they are and what they're doing? This is where we're going to get really deep into our work types and our work roles, because these two fields work together to essentially identify who's doing the work and how much we charge for their services. And then if there are any exceptions, are we charging time and a half, etc., for this type of work that this person's doing? To help explain this, I wanted to show up this nice infographic. What's the difference between work role and work type? Well, the work role is going to set the billing rate. And we set the billing rate really based on who is doing the work. We have some examples here, like consultant, an engineer, an admin, sales member. Something that I see pretty popular, something that's pretty popular with our team is maybe we'll have a junior technician and then a senior technician. We could bill the junior technician $200 an hour, but for a senior technician, we actually bill $250 an hour. The work role assigned to that member would set their billing rate for a time entry. Then we get into the work type. Now, work type is going to modify that billing role, and it can be based on a couple different things. We can say it's a custom rate. So maybe a work type in this example of remote has a custom rate, or actually let me use a different example. Maybe weekend work. No matter who's doing the work, whether it's a senior technician or a junior technician, we want to bill $250 an hour for. That's what we state on our agreements, etc. Well, we can set a work type to set a custom rate for weekend work for $200 an hour or $250 an hour. That'll override anything set up for the work role. It doesn't matter who's doing the work, it'll bill for that amount. We can also set up minimums. So saying if I send a senior technician on site, I don't want to bill for the 20 minutes it took them to finish the job. I want to bill for at minimum an hour if we actually took the time to send them out and have them working with the client on site. Another one that's probably the most popular is using the work type as a multiplier. For this, I like to use the example of after hours. You may charge your clients time and a half for your team working with them after hours. Well, you know that time and a half for your junior technician and time and a half for your senior technician will be very different numbers. So what you can do is you can come in to the work type and set up a multiplier of 1.5. What that'll do is take whatever work role they're set to in that billing rate and multiply it to get the appropriate value for what we should be billing them for this work. So I have an example just down here at the bottom. So our consultant work role, for simple math, it's $100 an hour. When combined with after hours work type, which has that time and a half multiplier I mentioned, it'll bill the client $150 an hour for that time. So it makes it a lot easier to take into account all of the different services that you provide for your clients. Does it matter where the service is happening? Does it matter what time the service is happening? So inside or outside of business hours. And then that work role is always there to be that base, essentially. How much do we bill for this person's work? They're a senior technician, junior technician, an administrator, etc. Now, where it can get a little bit tricky is that there are a bunch of places to set up billing rates. There's tons of areas where we can say, hey, this work type should bill at this amount. We would like this associated with the agreement, etc. The most basic place where this can be set up is through the work role setup table and work type setup table. There we're going to set our base rates. So junior technician, that's where we set $200 an hour, senior technician $250 an hour. Well, we might need to make that a little bit more customized to our different members. In that case, we can actually go into the member screen, and there's a field there that will override what we have in the setup tables. It'll use that particular billable rate for that member. Every hour they enter will be billed at that amount. Overriding that is if we go into the company screen for our clients, and we set up their company with a specific billing rate override. All their time will be billed at that rate no matter who's doing it or what's in the setup tables. We can get even more granular and do this to the agreement type. We can go into the agreement work role tab. So the agreement type would be that setup table record that represents agreements. The agreement itself is a place where we can go in and adjust whatever was set by that type. And then we can get even more specific, set it by the project. It can be on the individual service ticket, or these fields we can actually change on the individual time entry. But for purposes of this, I would focus on the setup tables, get the essentially get the basics lined out. How much do you charge for the different work roles in your organization? How much do you want to bill? And then we can get more and more granular as you find out which processes you need to tweak. Okay, well that works for everyone except for this one client. Let's do it on the company finance tab. This works for everyone except for this one agreement. We want to give them a discount. Let's do that on the agreement type, for example. Just to see who's been paying attention so far, we have a really quick pop quiz. What sets the billing rate for your time entries? Chatted through this a decent bit so far. So is this the work role, the work type, the security role, or the member type that sets the billing rate? Okay, we're doing really well so far. 80% of us are in agreement and correct, I'll say that. And everyone chiming in the Q&A pod is correct. Awesome job, guys. Give you guys just another second to get your answer in. Okay, it looks like nearly all of us have submitted our responses. Awesome job, because we're all correct. Or nearly all of us are correct. It is the work role. So this is where it can get a little bit confusing. The work role is going to set the billing rate for your time entries. Now work type comes in and work type adjusts that. It can completely override it if we set the work type to custom. Bill $200 for consulting work, bill $200 for after hours work, etc. But it looks first to the work role, and then it checks the work type to see how that work role is being modified. How are we taking that base billing rate for that person's role and adjusting it based on what they're doing now or where they're doing their work from? Nice job, though. Got about an 80% pass rate on that one. I'm very happy with that. Our next business case is getting into, oh gosh, something we hear so often, which is now we're looking at our team holistically. We have our technicians with their billable time entries, but we don't have just technicians. We have administrative members as well, and their time's not billable. So they don't really see the value of tracking their time. What time should we be considering for time entry? And really, when we're trying to answer this question, we generally like to recommend limiting the amount of exceptions you make for non-billable time. If you're using Manage as your company's source of truth for how you work with your clients, what information's been passed on to them, how you're billing them, what amount of time you're putting into their contracts, maintaining that relationship, every single person at your organization, billable or non-billable, should be entering their time. So really, the answer is all time, all the time, and on time. And we say this just because when we get on a little bit later, maybe if you do the finance cert, so if you really love the services cert, you go through it and you decide that you or someone else would benefit from the finance cert, one thing we're going to look at there is our agreement gross profit. Now, if our technicians are entering time, fabulous. We're getting a really great picture of how much we're charging for their time and also how much it costs us to have them working those hours for the client. But now if someone at my front desk is answering a bunch of phone calls about this agreement, going through and checking time entries, reviewing invoices, responding to the client, and they're sinking hours into this agreement, but they don't see the purpose of tracking their non-billable time, those are hours that person could have been doing something else to benefit our organization, but was working on this contract. We still want to track the hours they've spent so we can get a better picture, not of what we would bill the client for that, but of the cost to us for how much time they had to sink into maintaining this agreement, even just from an administrative perspective. So if that person's entering their time, listing it as do not bill, we don't want the client to see this, we don't want to charge them for it, it'll give us a better idea of our true gross profit, because now it's not just our technicians' time being spent on this, it's everyone in our organization, how much work they're putting in. What is it really costing us to maintain this agreement overall? That's kind of a high level. I mentioned all time, all the time, on time. It's one of our best practices here at Manage. We say all the time because any work that goes into this, like I mentioned before, when we get into those reports, any scoping, any documentation, all of this should be entered in the system. One thing you might notice is one of our recommendations, whenever we're talking about entering time, what time should be entered, what time matters, all of that, is, well, how do we keep our technicians as busy and billable all day? How do we make sure that all of our work for this client gets billed against them and the company is not eating up time that they're spending with admin work and follow-ups? Well, a lot of that is by putting all of the time that you're scoping, responding to the client, and documenting the issue or doing research onto that ticket. That doesn't mean you have to bill for all of it, but it means that all of it's accounted for and you can see the true cost of that, either that ticket, that agreement, etc. So all time, we want all of that entered so we get a better picture of what we're working on. It's something that later on as we're running reports, we might spot out a problem that we didn't know we had. Maybe our technicians are entering hours of do not bill time onto agreements. Our clients aren't ever seeing that, they're not being charged for it, but it's stuff that we're paying for. We might want to start changing the way that we bill those agreements so that we become more profitable or so that we have more billable time. As far as all the time, this time is your most valuable asset. I really can't stress this enough. And one reason why it's your most valuable asset is because it allows you to bill, and it allows you to bill with detail, but also it serves as your best way of keeping your team accountable. And accountability is going to be huge as you continue to scale, whether someone's administrative or a technician on the service desk. If we communicated something with the client and they come back and ask someone else, we want to have a record of the conversation that happened, not to prove that we said the right thing or to throw it back at the client, but just so that we can be as well informed about this relationship and what's been going on as we can. So whoever picks up the phone can look at that ticket and see what happened, whether it was a technician entering billable time or someone who answered a call from them and they were maybe upset over the phone. We want all of that to be tracked, keeping our team super accountable. And then lastly, on time. This one's pretty huge for me. We like to say if it's not in ConnectWise, it didn't happen. And if it's not in ConnectWise soon or shortly after it happens, the quality of the detail on that entry will never be as high. And I noticed this with myself personally. When I was back in support, I was using service tickets to communicate with clients. So I was always entering in my notes what I'd done, what I had left to do, what I needed from them, and then sending out those emails. And I would track my time, track everything I'd done. It was all in Manage. Well, as I moved into the education team, I ended up doing much more project-based work. So I wasn't constantly needing to communicate with clients. I was entering time on different issues, and I would look at the end of the day, and sometimes when things get really hectic, I'd notice that I hadn't kept up with my time entries throughout the day. If I caught it by the end of the day, I could go through and say, okay, I remember I did all this here, I did all this here. But if I waited until the next day, I would struggle looking back at the previous day, figuring out how I'd spent my time. Now, my manager, if I had a 2-hour entry of administrative time and I just put admin time checking emails, she might not be so keen on that. However, if I went in and I entered those 2 hours and said, hey, I answered 5 different emails from my IT Nation share event, I had to follow up and test out these things, prevented these tickets from being created, et cetera, she'd be a lot more understanding of my non-billable time. So I always kind of harp on that. The sooner you can get the time in, the better. Okay, bringing us to another pop quiz. This is really making sure that everyone is tracking with that work role and work type conversation. So let's see if we can get above 80% on this one. What modifies billing rates by applying minimums or multipliers? So think, what was setting the billing rate for my member time, and then what can I use to modify it? Okay, it seems like we're all pretty hesitant to answer on this one. I hope I didn't scare anyone away. I'm not going to be upset if we don't make 80%. That's perfectly fine. I'd rather have more people answering. Okay. Okay, so it seems like all but just a few of us have answered, and that looks pretty good to me. And we're all crushing it. Awesome job, guys. It is the work type. So not to sound like a broken record, but work role is setting the base hourly rate. We charge X amount for an hour of a technician's time. And then the work type is coming in and saying, okay, well, it was that technician's time, but they were after hours, so actually we need to take their billable rate and multiply that by time and a half. Now, kind of drawing back into that all the time, on time, if this is something that your team struggles with, and if your team does, it's not just you. Most of our partners have the same struggle. They share your woes. We do have a poster on the university that I would recommend printing out We like to print this out and kind of passively aggressively post it on other people's desks, ones that have difficulty remembering to enter their time. It was more of a big deal when I was in support, when we had time being placed against agreements. But this is an option for you. Just, I think really the most important thing up front is decide how you're going to use that time, how you can make the best use of the reporting within Manage. That'll answer for you all the questions of what time should be entered. If you're actually reporting on gross margin, get that admin time in there as well, because the hours your team spends on administrative work is a cost to you. So get all that time entered as much as you can and pull from that reporting what you need. And then really the next thing is to educate your team on what their time is used for. It's used for them to watch their own backs, make sure that they're reporting their communications with clients appropriately and they have everything they've done documented well. So if people have questions, they're not being pulled out of their day job to be interviewed about a ticket and how things happened. It's all listed there for someone to review and kind of leave them be. And then also really consider what you're incentivizing from your team. We'll probably get into this a little bit later, but we noticed that what we tend to incentivize our team kind of focuses on and can almost, without even meaning to, kind of game the system to get to that particular goal, whether it's utilized time, whether it's billable time, etc. We want to find ways to incentivize our team for entering all of their time, all the time, on time. And if we do that, we'll actually get the true benefit that we can get out of the services module in Manage. Okay, so our team is great at staying connected with our clients. So often they'll let the client know that the job's been completed, but they'll forget to document the time that they spent solving the problem. So they'll let them know, hey, I solved this for you, but then we have no time on the ticket, no notes on the ticket for what they did to resolve this. So how do we help our team kind of enter their time and then send out this email simultaneously? Kind of kill two birds with one stone, document everything they're doing and update the client kind of in one fell swoop. Well, we do this by utilizing a feature called closed loop that we set up through our various service boards. So now closed loop communication, at a high level, if we're on a service ticket and we just simply hit the new note button, this will open up generally our discussion pod. Now in our discussion pod, we can go through and add all the different criteria that we need for a time entry. In this example, I have my work role. I am actually a senior technician in this case, and the agreement that I'm working on with my client is already listed. That was probably defaulted onto the ticket, but I can double check it here to be sure. Down below, I can say my start and end time. How long have I been working on this ticket? Now that start time will actually default to when I first opened the service ticket record. The end time, I could either enter in manually, or when I save this, it'll automatically be pre-populated with the time that I save and closed this particular entry. I can review my work types, that's how it'd be modified. If I was coming in on the weekends, I might want to hit that. Instead of saying regular, which will be my default, I'd switch that to after hours or weekend. That way I know the calculations for how we bill will be automatically calculated for me. I won't have to go in and make any changes. But really, when we're in here, that's our time entry. We have that checkbox that lets you know that you're entering time. You can deselect it if you don't intend to, but for most cases, we're going to want to leave this checked. And then we have where these notes are actually going. Now our discussion pod, that's going to be the most popular on our service boards because this is going to ensure that the communication, the closed loop of communication is being all listed within the discussion thread of our service ticket. It'll have the client replies and our replies in chronological order so we can really track the conversation as a whole. We also have the ability down at the bottom to say, well, not only am I logging this in the discussion thread of the ticket, not only am I entering a time entry for this period of time, but I also need this to be sent as an email to the contact on this ticket and/or resources. Just by having this selected, by having this checked by the contact name, I'm sending out an email with all this detail to the client. It's not going to show them how much they're being billed. It's not going to necessarily show the time that's being entered, but it'll have all my notes that I entered into the discussion pod just above, and images if I have that set up right now. So a lot of these fields, there's a lot of checkboxes that we could be selecting. There are a lot of defaults in the system. What we're going to strive for is making sure that when a technician hits the new note button, they need to make as few changes as possible. We all know it's already pretty difficult to get our technicians to enter their time, so the last thing we want to be doing is giving them a whole checklist of different fields they have to toggle on and off and double check as they're entering their time. Because of this, it's really beneficial for you as an administrator or as a service manager to go through and optimize your individual service boards so that the defaults that appear on them are appropriate for the technicians working those boards. One example would be we create our new note. Well, when someone selects new note, what do we want to be updated? Do we want this to go automatically to the internal tab, which is just for our team? Do we want it to go into the discussion thread? We'll want to make sure that, as it's listed here, that discussion thread is always selected. And I also like recommending updates to all, because updates to all is a great place to look, because it will show us our internal notes, our discussion notes, all in chronological order, so we can see not only our conversation with the client, but any additional information that came in. Maybe they called into the front desk and they were a little bit upset on this day, and our administrator made a note. Maybe the dispatcher got a couple emails from them and they made a note here, hey, I bundled these tickets together because they looked like the same thing. We can kind of see when and where things happened. And just to kind of reiterate, when I say optimize on individual service boards, there's a pretty good chance that we have at least a help desk board created, and you should probably also have an RMM board that handles everything coming in from, say, Automate. Now on that board, unlike our help desk board, we probably don't want updates automatically sent to the contact on the ticket. We don't necessarily need the discussion to be updated. There are a couple things that we can think about. My favorite probably for something like an RMM board is considering it to be a silent board. So all the information comes in through there. If there's an issue, it moves to our help desk board. Otherwise, it lives and dies on that RMM board. Well, when those tickets are coming in for our client, we don't necessarily want a bunch of notifications sent out, so we can just go ahead and set that up so that the contact, resource, and CC checkboxes saying send emails to are always deselected by default. At any time when you're entering notes, you could click on and off these options, but we really want the least amount of manual intervention required from our team. So just on the service board, set it up the way that you intend for it to function for everybody. It's kind of your best bet. So most of our team members are focused on more than one task at a time. And by the time they close tickets or projects, their timesheets are a total mess, and we know they're losing billable hours, but we're not really sure how to untangle it. So our team needs a quick solution to automatically track this time. This is where we're going to recommend something called the stopwatch feature. Now, we like to bring up this feature, one, because it's pretty cool, but also because it solves for a really common concern that we hear, which is, well, okay, entering all my time and notes on each individual ticket is great if I can work through my day in a linear fashion, but I simply don't have that luxury. I'm working on 4 different tickets at a time. I'm bouncing all around trying to solve these issues and putting out fires. Fair. Some of us have rough lives on the service desk. We totally get that. Well, the stopwatch feature, it's actually a lab, a managed lab that you can toggle on and off, and it gives you this nice little stopwatch bar. It'll add it to all of your service tickets. What this means is that you can go into a service ticket and kind of press play to start tracking time, press pause to pause that time entry, start it back up when you're working on it again, pause it again, and then at the end, when you click stop and you're ready to close out this time entry, it's actually automatically calculated all of the time that this stopwatch was actually active. So if you have to run out, if you're on the phones all day and you're working tickets, when you take a call, you can pause your time entry, get on the phone, talk to the client, get their ticket created, etc. Hang up the phone, hit play, and continue working on the ticket. And it'll deduct the 30 minutes you spent talking to the client on the phone from your total time entry, which is super handy. It also allows you, there's this pop-up that appears where you can add in your notes. It's essentially drafting your notes for your time entry, where you can go ahead and start entering some items that you're working on as you're going through it. You don't necessarily need to create a time entry just quite now. One huge benefit of the stopwatch is if you're ever in a situation where you're working multiple tickets, maybe one of your vendors has an outage, so you have a lot of very similar tickets coming in and they need similar updates and work, you can actually see the stopwatch from your My List view. So if you're looking at all tickets within My List, you can toggle on and off all of your stopwatches, run them simultaneously, keep tabs on them from there, instead of having to go through and create manual entries on each of these tickets. If you think this would be really helpful for someone on your team, maybe a dispatcher, maybe a service manager, or just a technician wearing a few too many hats possibly, doing all the work for your team, you can go into the setup tables and find Manage Labs, and it'll just be called Stopwatch. You'll have to turn it on. As a note, if you want to get the most out of this, well, kind of a quick heads up, you may not have access, which means that you are blocked from this particular section within the setup tables. Within your security role, though, an administrator can go in and give you access to the Manage Labs setup table. But the pro tip that I wanted to mention is there are a couple things that you can do per member if you find someone that you think would really benefit from this. One thing is you can automatically start the stopwatch. This means that when they click into a ticket, it starts running and they can just hit pause when they stop working on it. So that could be super handy if it's someone that you know will use this often. Also, auto starting stopwatch means that when they click into a ticket, if they're not already a resource, they'll be added. So that's another super handy piece of this. We always recommend having that dedicated dispatcher, but if you're really just starting out, this might be a great way to kind of get around this and get your teams linked to tickets, accountable for their time entries, and tracking their time. It can be a really, really great place to start. And then also the ability to auto pop up notes with stopwatch. That just means that as you click start, it's going to pop up that notes pod so you can start drafting your time entry right away. It's just prompting you before you're there trying to close out the time entry to start entering some initial notes. And that's really one of the huge benefits up front is if you have a dedicated dispatcher, this might not be as valuable for you. But if your team currently is going in and cherry picking tickets and getting through them as quickly as they can, if you have this feature on, those individual features, so it's by member set up in the My Account screen to auto start stopwatch, it means that they'll be added to those tickets as they start work on them. So that can be really helpful. So something that we hear often is, I kind of need to be a resource on this ticket. I need to know what's going on. I need to remember to follow up, keep tabs, keep an eye on this, but I really don't want to receive all of these notifications. Notifications in the form of status updates, so-and-so updated the ticket, partner responded, etc. If those aren't emails that you need to be receiving, but you need to check back in on this ticket, we have this great feature called Follow. So what Follow is going to do is it's almost like you're a resource light. You're not listed on the resources pod of the ticket. However, this ticket is added to your Sales My List following tab. So it looks like this. This is where before we were looking at the service tab and we were reviewing our tickets and we could use our stopwatch feature from there. Well, the following tab is similar, but it's just tracking all the tickets that we've hit that follow button on, saying we really need to check up on this. You can also use workflow rules to kind of work in with that process and make sure that you're seeing the notifications that you should be seeing from tickets that you're following. You might not want all of them, but you might want some. And then I also want to take a minute to go through our timesheets. So as a member, being able to look at your timesheet and kind of see really quickly what is left to be done, what needs to be reviewed, what needs to change, what do I need to add is going to be key for a lot of your members as a first step to actually entering in the right information on their timesheets. So I'll call out a couple fields, right? As kind of a basic high level, we're seeing every item that we've entered time on, whether it's a charge code or a service ticket, it's all listed out for us vertically. Now horizontally, we see on the far side which days of the week have we entered time on these records and how much time. What's handy about this is I can click into any given one and I can review that time or add to that time. When I look at an individual day, I can see every entry that was entered, and at the very bottom I see, have I entered the appropriate amount of time? Now, why this is going to be so beneficial is when you're starting to really lean into the concept of manage as your source of truth, all time, all the time, on time, the best way to start that is by requiring your team members to account for all 40 or 45 hours that they're in the office per week. Now that starts at, it starts on a per timesheet basis, but here's the easiest way we can see that. Because if I go to my timesheet for this week, like in this example, I can see that for today I have my 9 hours, I am fully caught up. Whether that time is billable or non-billable was based on the individual entries, but once I hit that 9, I know that I'm good to go and I have all my time accounted for. Once we can get to this ideal state where our team members are following up on their timesheets, making sure they have 9 hours or 8 hours accounted for every single day, then we can get a little bit more into the minutia, a little bit more into the details. Well, maybe we should have a higher billable percentage. Well, maybe we should have a higher utilized percentage. But to kind of start off, we really just need to make sure we get 8 or 9 hours a day. Hold people accountable to entering their time, and then we'll kind of work to getting more and more detailed and then strategize how that time should look in terms of billable or utilized being two of our most popular. Probably what you'll do is you'll go into these boards and see that not everyone's at 9 hours per day and they're not really sure what they did with those other hours. Well, even having members responsible for accounting for all their other time as an administrative cost helps them become more accountable and more keen to accurately represent their time on their tickets, because they don't want to show that they're spending 4 hours on something that they can't really document, can't really claim, can't bill. But now across the top, what's handy is not only are we seeing all of our time entries for this week, we can click into them and make adjustments, but we have the option to manually add new time entries as needed and as we go. So I could go into Friday if I hadn't added my time yet. I can actually look at the bottom. One of my favorite pro tips, we might even go over this later, is if you look at the bottom, how many hours are entered for today? That's the time I put on my tickets, maybe against lunch, etc. I can click the plus icon at the top to add a new entry for today, make the charge code admin, enter in my total hours for today into the deduct field with my actual start and end time for my shift, so 7:30 to 4:30, and it'll calculate for me how much of my day is not accounted for, so I could enter in the things that I did with my time that weren't necessarily billable, like reviewing my emails, maybe catching up on some helping out a colleague with a ticket that they have, etc. And then down at the bottom we have those general totals, and this is really the field that we want to start focusing on right away. Make sure we have every hour of the day that we're working accounted for, and it gets to an appropriate total hours for the week. Once we get a little bit more advanced, or maybe if we already are, if you have those 45 hours being accounted for, your team's stellar there, but you know that you have an issue with a lot of time being given away for free, this is where you can lead your team to look. It breaks down your billable and non-billable time for the week. So here I can see at a really high level, okay, well I'm 55.56% billable. That might be a totally appropriate number for our technicians, depending on the time they spend training, the time that they spend doing administrative work that we don't actually bill for, but we log against those agreements, hopefully. But I can see from here, based on my role, whether or not I'm reaching an appropriate billable percentage. If you see something like 20 here, you might want to incentivize your technical teams to get that number up, enter more billable time, represent their work accurately. And then at the very top, when we're happy with that, once we tell our team what they need to be entering per day, per week, and what's a reasonable billable to non-billable percentage, then they know kind of the quick things that they can check before hitting that submit button and sending it to their time approver to be reviewed. And then as a note, we show this as billable and non-billable, but really when we're talking non-billable, there are two different things that we could be referring to. To start off, I kind of wanted to define these three for you real quick, just as we're here. So billable time, this is time that's listed as billable. We're going to be invoicing the customer for it. This time that we enter, once it's approved or not, depending on our settings, it'll flow into the invoicing wizard, and we can create an invoice from this to send to the client, and then have them pay us on that. For do not bill, this actually means that this time is not billable to the customer, and we really don't want to show them this time either. So our do not bill time, we can decide whether or not that shows up in invoicing. However, that time will not show up on an invoice, if that makes sense. It flows through to invoicing so we can review it, be like, oh, okay, that was non-billable. Is that appropriate, or should we move that to billable? Maybe not. But when we generate the invoice, it's not going to show up on that record whether or not it's flowing into invoicing. No charge is different because no charge is also a $0 entry. This is not going to bill the customer. However, no charge time will always show up on their invoices. So that's kind of how it works. I like to think of our billable time as kind of straightforward. We're billing the customer for this work. No charges, hey, we're not going to bill you, but we want you to know that we did this. It's kind of your show-off time, or the time that you're comfortable with them seeing that you chose not to bill them, but you want them to know you did this work. And then do not bill could be that truly admin side of it. Maybe we're cleaning up a mess that we made, and we have an administrator going through logs of emails trying to figure out what happened. We definitely don't want to bill them for that time. We also might not even want to show them that time. So we can list it as do not bill, saying, hey, don't bill, also don't show this. So this, I kind of gave away this example already. But this is solving for when technicians come back and they're like, hey, you expect me to enter 9 hours of billable time every single day this week, but some of my time just isn't billable, and some of my time isn't against tickets, it's not even against customers. I'm cleaning out my email inbox, I'm working with other colleagues, I'm helping them out on questions or with training. How do I account for all of this time? Well, this is where we recommend bringing in charge codes. Charge codes not even help, charge codes are most helpful for all these administrative or non-billable hours that we find coming up during the day, and we definitely want our team to be submitting. So a charge code is going to be used to track time that's more internally tied than it is billable or associated with any given customer. Now, some ways that we use this is administrative time. That's probably my favorite. This is what I use for going through my email inbox, responding to emails. Maybe if we have a conference and I have to sign up for that conference and pick out the sessions I'm going to, all that's fair game for administrative time. Now, also, when I go on PTO, I would like to represent my vacation. It should be listed in Manage and it should show on my timesheet because that's a bunch of time that I'm spending just not billing against customers. I still am required, even if I'm out of the office, to have my 45 hours a week. And that's another thing. Exceptions are your enemy. Consistency is key. Whether or not people are working on tickets or working on billable work versus non-billable work, requiring that same amount of hours being entered per week is going to really help ensure that this process continues and people lean into it. They need to be consistently entering their time no matter what. We do the same thing for holiday time and also sick leave. Now, another thing is every day we can have a charge code just for lunch. In that charge code, you're expected to get to 5 hours every week. So you enter in an hour every day, usually a schedule entry blocked off on your calendar that you can right-click and enter time and then choose that lunch charge code. On an individual ticket, what you'll do to enter that charge code is usually I'm creating this entry from a miscellaneous schedule entry. I blocked off an hour for lunch, I blocked off 2 hours for my dentist appointment. I right-click on that to enter time. Well, the first thing I have to do is I have to change the charge to at the top. I'll select, not from a ticket, not from a customer, but from my available charge codes, which one's most appropriate. It's either going to be vacation, training, admin, etc. Once I choose that, I can list out my notes, where I was going, what I was doing, and I'll be able to enter my hours that way. And keep an eye out. There's a really great report called Time Detail that you can use to track where your team is spending their hours. You can see whether it's against companies, whether it's against charge codes, billable and non-billable. It gives you a great idea of where your team is spending their time. And like I mentioned before, the first hurdle is getting your team to enter all their hours. Then we can go into different reports. Once we have all this data in the system, and we can start pulling reports to filter through it and start optimizing, tweaking little bits of the process to make our billable percentages, our effective hourly rates, all that so much better. And then I wanted to show some additional examples. You can create your own charge codes. If these did not really resonate with you, if you're seeing admin, vacation, holiday, sales, sick, training, and you're thinking, well, we spend so much time out at conferences. That's really what we consider to be an important event to document, and then training is something totally different. Well, you can create your own charge codes just based off of what you need your team to be entering, what administrative hours. It might even be appropriate to start off with just admin and then kind of build from there. You can always add an additional charge codes. Just figure out what you need to report on and what you need to represent in your reporting and in your system, and then build it out to match. But these are our kind of basic recommendations if you don't already have some great ideas. Okay, so this was the example that I actually used earlier. This is me on a normal day going in and entering my time. I've been working on projects all day. I've been working on different tickets, talking on the phone. I went to lunch, etc. I've been entering my time diligently, but there was some downtime where I didn't write that I was responding to emails. I didn't write that I was taking a lap and going and talking to someone in partner success. Well, now I can go into my timesheet and I see that I only have 8.23 hours logged for today. Instead of going back and trying to figure out where this exact time entry was, I can actually just say new item at the very top, that plus icon at the top of today, and then choose the admin charge code. And instead of trying to figure out what time of day this happened, when it happened, oh, it was 2 minutes there, 5 minutes there, no big deal. I enter in my start and end time for work. So here I work 8 to 5, let's say, and then I just enter my total hours so far for the day in the deduct field. That gives me everything remaining. I have 0.77 hours not accounted for. There I can enter in really what was I doing with my day? What are some tasks that I accomplished that were outside of tickets, not client related, and I have all that information for my admin. Also, I've met my goal, which is simply to enter in my 9 hours per day, no matter what that consists of. So that's probably the fastest way to get this done, is using that deduct field. That's also really handy if you're working on a service ticket and you break for lunch. So if you're on a service or project ticket and you go for an hour lunch and come back, instead of creating 2 separate time entries to account for the time before lunch and after lunch, just enter the full start time and end time and then deduct 1 to represent that you spent an hour doing something else. So another pop quiz. Tomorrow is going to be a half day due to a scheduled doctor's appointment. What's the best way to track your time on your timesheet? What would we be using to represent the doctor's appointment? Okay. So let me see. I'm seeing a couple questions come in, and we should have a few minutes to answer these at the end, but I'll try to address some of them now just while we're waiting for more answers to roll in. So what happens if the work role type is included in the agreement? So this is kind of going back to our original or earlier conversations about that billable rate set by the work role and then the type adjusting it. So if it's included in the agreement, let's say you mean, is it covered or not covered? Well, either way, let's say if we give the client, what would make the most sense for this? So if we give the client $500 to use each month, and every month that resets, they get an additional $500, the agreement work role and work type is going to essentially function the same way. It's going to make sure that we're deducting from their total available amount that they can use appropriately. So if they come to us and they say, hey, I need help on the weekend, it goes against their agreement, it's going to bill the agreement time and a half, not just the time for that member. So hopefully that please add in additional information if you still have questions on that. But a huge misconception that we see with agreements that might help with this is people think that because a client has an agreement, their time should be do not bill or no charge, which is absolutely not the case. Even if your agreement is unlimited, we want all the time to be billable because technically it's being billed to the agreement. You've set up the agreement in such a way to where they have a certain amount of hours, a certain amount of time, or a certain amount that they can use every month, every year, every quarter. Well, if that time's not billable, it's not deducting from what they can use on the agreement. As long as it's covered by the agreement and they have an appropriate amount of hours, it's unlimited, they have an appropriate amount to use, it'll be covered. They're not going to be billed for it. But you need to bill the agreement or else your reporting is going to show up really funky because it's going to say that you're giving them $500 or you have an unlimited agreement and you haven't billed anything for them, which you have. The agreement's just covering that bill for them. Okay, so we got in a lot of answers, and most of us are correct. And I really do appreciate actually the incorrect answers that we get because I think I might have caused some confusion, and I'll clear that up right now. This would be a charge code, and when we had a good few people, so you're not alone if you entered schedule entry as your recommended answer. And I think that's because I mentioned a couple times if I'm going to be out of the office or if I'm representing my lunch, a lot of times I'll do that as a schedule entry on my calendar, right-click, enter time, choose the charge code. So a schedule entry and a time entry are not really connected. A schedule entry blocks off my calendar, but time entry is created to enter time on my timesheet. If I'm doing my job well, really well, my schedule entries and my time entries are kind of parallel. I have both entered, they're all for the same times, but one does not create the other. One does not mean that the other exists. They exist kind of separately. So if I'm entering time on a schedule entry, it's probably a schedule entry because it doesn't have a company associated. It's not something for Chris Craft Boats. It's not something for the accounting firm that we work for. It's me checking my emails. So I create a miscellaneous schedule entry. It's blocked on my calendar. I choose the charge code to tell Manage, well, this is internal time. How was this internal time being used? In my case, it was used just for admin work. Maybe it was used in this case for an appointment, doctor's appointment, PTO. I would choose the charge code that accurately represented how my time was spent. So this is tracking your time on your timesheet. A schedule entry has really nothing to do with your timesheet. It has to do with your calendar. Thank you all for answering. Okay. So in this case, we have our team, they've bought in, they're entering their time every week, but you're having the billing team come through and the time's never quite entered quickly enough. They're always reminding them, hey, submit your timesheets, submit your timesheets. It can cause some friction between your service team and your billing team. If the service team, this is another reason why it's so important to enter all the time, on time. If the service team isn't being diligent in keeping up with their work, the billing team's going to have more of a headache. The billing team's going to have to come with more questions, more reminders, more requests. We really want to make sure that things are flowing from service to billing quickly, easily, and in a way that they can use to generate the most accurate invoices. So in this case, we're going to really want to focus on creating a timesheet submission process. It's going to start with making sure that the right people can access timesheets and timesheet reviews through our security roles. We also want to make sure that we've explained to our team what's really important with their time. And as kind of a quick example, when I was working more service ticket based work, I would always get in trouble if I had a billable time entry that didn't have an agreement associated, because all of our partners had agreements. What I started doing is every time I didn't set up this feature, my timesheet was sent back. I felt real bad about it. So I created a view so that I could quickly find anything that had an agreement listed or anything that was listed as billable, and then I would sort to have the ones that didn't have an agreement pop up to the top. So I would click on the agreement field, it would filter, and all the agreements would be at the bottom. The ones without an agreement would show up at the top as empty. I could go through really quickly and easily and adjust those, but it was because I knew specifically what my timesheet approver was looking for. They would not approve a timesheet for me if it had that filter. So really one of the first things is explaining to your team what needs to look right and what needs to look a certain way before they enter their timesheets. And then lastly, having a way to get a high-level overview of time approval. Now within Manage, there are a few ways. You'll actually see, if you're a time approver, you'll see this on your notices pod. There are a couple time entries waiting for your approval. Clicking that will get you into your time approval screen. Also as a user, if you want to check in on your time for this week, I'd say use that top toolbar, My Timesheet. It'll take you to really what's going on for today. You can review, make edits, and even submit from here. So you get that breakdown of what's going on and Manage for this current time period. How many hours have you entered today? You'll also see charge codes. So this is where your charge codes for your miscellaneous, your admin work, your PTO is all going to flow through and list here as just another thing that you worked on this day and this week. And then lastly at the top, once everything is matching up correctly, you have all of your hours accounted for, you know how to use those charge codes, you can submit your time to your time approver. Now one thing that's really helpful is you can use this open calendar view. If you notice that you don't have 9 hours for today, but you know you worked for 9 hours today, open your calendar view and see what went on in your schedule that you might have forgotten to enter time on. And this is where we get back to something I mentioned before. It's so important to understand the difference between a schedule entry and a time entry. Schedule entries are what you'll likely see if you just go onto your calendar right now. They reside on your calendar, block up your time. The orangish ones are your miscellaneous schedule entries. The blue ones are your service tickets. Brown is your project tickets. Green are activities. And those pink entries are actually meetings. Well, one thing that you can do is if you're saying, okay, well, these are schedule entries. I know they're not time entries, but how do I make sure that they're matching up? We have a brand new view. Well, it's not brand new, it's probably a year old, but we have a wonderful view in this display type dropdown called Time with Schedule Overlay. If you click that, it's actually going to take all those schedule entries, make them translucent, so they're still visible, but not super bold, and then it's going to show you really, really realistically what time have you actually entered. This is a great way to make sure that your time entries and schedule entries are actually matching up, and your two are in sync. And that's just another point that I want to reiterate that I talked about before. Schedule entries do not automatically create time entries. Schedule entries block off your calendar, time entries log the time, bill the time, all that good stuff. One pro tip that I like you to use is right-clicking on my schedule entry, because when you right-click on a schedule entry, you have the option to enter time, and it automatically takes the schedule entry start and end time and pre-fills that. You can make edits if you need to, but it's a really fast way to make sure that your calendar and your time entries match up at the end of the day. As a time approver, if you were to actually say, hey, there are 5 items, you saw that in your notices pod, you have 5 timesheets waiting for your approval, and you click that, you'd get into your summary screen where you would want to go through and review those timesheets pending approval. And clicking this link will take you to that full list. Another thing that you can do is, depending on your permissions, you can select Show All Approvals. This means not just the people that report to you, but everyone at your organization. As we're starting to get more invested in following through with our time entries, this is going to be a great place to start. Look at them for everyone, see who's lagging behind. Also, if you might be the only time approver at your organization, that's something you definitely want to select on, because you might find members that have the wrong time approver set right now, and their time might not be going through the proper channels. So check that to see every single timesheet. Now, kind of the last thing that I want to review before we break, I want to talk through approvals, approving, rejecting, and reversing. Super easy enough to say approve your time entries, approve your timesheets, everything looks good. But when you get into the timesheets, you're going to see more options. If you notice, for example, a single time entry that does not look right, you have a couple things you can do. Usually we say click into that entry, and then from within you would reject that individual entry. This one had 0 hours, that's not appropriate, you're working on this ticket, we need you to correct this. When you select that reject button within that entry, it'll give you the ability to actually explain to the resource what's wrong. You can tell them what to do, next steps, etc., and then select OK. Well, once you've actually rejected that time entry, you have the ability to reject the timesheet. What's really nice about rejecting a timesheet is it says that one entry that was rejected, reopen that for them to edit. Everything else, keep it locked down so we can continue billing. So kind of we can continue business as usual, not stop the process for one bad entry. As a pro tip, there's a reverse option that's different from a rejection, because when you reverse a timesheet, you open up everything. None of that needs to be reviewed and approved before billing can be billed right now, because it's all open. The resource can make any changes they need. They need to fix this whole timesheet. Keeps you from going into each individual item and making those changes or rejecting them individually, but it does open up the full timesheet for them. You do have to be a managed administrator, which means that checkbox on your member page has to be selected to reverse. To reject, you just have to be their time approver. And this is the checkbox, kind of a zoomed in view of what you'll see on your member page. So reverse, open up all of the time entries, put your invoicing on hold. Reject is just open up this one entry, let everything else be invoiced, but let this one be fixed by the resource. So two different options depending on usually how much needs to be changed. So another pop quiz, how can you display time entries on your My Calendar screen alongside schedule entries? Okay. So which option did we look at so that you could see the translucent entries that represent your schedule entries and then also the actual time that you've entered right beside it? That's probably one of the answer to this is probably one of my favorite features within Manage, honestly. Okay, so it looks like a lot of us have gotten our answers in. Just holding out for a couple more people because I see these numbers changing a decent bit. But it looks like most of us are on the same page and answering correctly. Yes, this would be your display type. And keep in mind our latest release has some additional display types heading your way. You can use this currently to show the location on the ticket. So if you really utilize that remote on-site, etc., you can look at the location instead of the company name. You can see the time entries only. You can see time entries with schedule overlay, so you get both. You can see the schedule entries, so just what you have booked out for today. And one that's going to be coming in a later version of Manage is you can actually see the status right from there. So you can change it and see which ones are partner responded, which ones are waiting on partner, which ones are closed out from the day. So a lot of cool options with the display type just in the My Calendar screen though. So hopefully now that we've covered this session, you understand that the work role is what sets that base billing rate, and then your work type modifies that rate. It can override it if it's set to customize, it could be a multiplier, etc., but it modifies what you have set for the work role. Service technician, consultant versus after hours, weekend, regular. We've also identified what time needs to be tracked, which is kind of a sneaky takeaway because the answer should always be all time. All time, all the time, on time. Make it a process, make it consistent, make few to no exceptions to who has to enter their time. And as long as, if it's regular, it's constantly, everyone's responsible for doing it, it's constantly being tracked, it'll be so much easier to get the reporting you need out of Manage and have that reporting be consistent. Because we'll see a lot of this later on. If we put garbage into the system, we really can't get much out of it. It's kind of garbage in, garbage out. We want to have the best, most accurate detail placed in the system so we can run some really great reports and make our service desk much more efficient based on those reports. And then lastly, complete weekly timesheets. Make sure that your team is responsible for entering all their time for the week at the end of the week, and then you have a process for review. The right people are reviewing those time entries, they know what to look out for, and they'll be reversing or rejecting entries based on whether or not they're correct. Because if you tell your team to go ahead and enter all this time and do all this work, but no one's gonna hold them accountable, no one's gonna help them make sure it's accurate, it's gonna be really difficult for them to see the need to continue. So track all time, all the time, on time. Use work roles and work types to calculate the billing for your team, for your invoicing team, so much easier. And then those timesheets being required at the end of the week, having an approvals process will make sure that the rates you've set up are correct, enough time is being entered, all the time is being entered, and later on it'll be really easy for us to run some great reports, see what our team's struggling with, and make some strategic decisions for the future, we'll say. So I did kind of run right up until my hour. So soon we're going to go on a 10-minute break, and then we'll be back for ticket management with Dylan. So I'll take a look in this pod and see if we have any questions that I can answer real quick now, but otherwise we'll probably come back with some answers just after the break. Okay. Okay, so we have someone asking about timesheets. They're saying, I think our system's invoicing based on when a ticket is closed, not necessarily when the time has been approved. Those are all settings within our billing setup table. And let me see if I can show you this quickly. Because you don't have to say that time can only be approved once it's been you don't necessarily have to require that time is approved before it's invoiced. We really like to recommend that, because if you have at least another set of eyes on this, approving the time entry, your invoice will be more accurate, but it's not necessarily a requirement. So here are the settings that we're referring to, and let me share my screen with you real quick. So if we're looking at our billing setup tables, so into setup tables, found the billing setup table. You might have one for each individual location that you work with, but in this case, I'm going to get into our Boston headquarters. If I scroll down and I look at my invoicing defaults for service tickets, this is probably going to be the most appropriately related to what we've covered so far. Bill service tickets only after they've been closed is likely what you have turned on. Once that ticket is moved to a closed status, it can flow into invoicing. Now, here's another option. What you likely have on is this, so make sure that they're closed, but you also probably have on bill unapproved time and expense records. Now, this can be risky. It honestly is up to your team and up to your processes, but this means that your timesheet doesn't have to go through approval process before we can generate an invoice. I wouldn't necessarily say that either of these settings are wrong. It really just depends on your approval process, who's the right person to determine whether or not this time can be billed. But I would make sure that your service manager, your technicians, and your finance people understand which items are set, and they can consider that when they're working through this billing process, because it'll be super important whether or not time has to be approved and whether or not the service ticket has to be closed. So I hope that helps. I'm going to go ahead and start our 10-minute break, but we'll be right back, let's say at 2:45 Eastern time to continue with our next session on ticket management. So thank you all so much.
Hello, welcome back. I hope everyone had a nice break. My name is Dylan Baxter. I am also a software training consultant here to wrap up your day for session 1-2. I know our time is going to be a little shorter here, so if you guys do have any questions, please feel free to add them in. We might not have enough time to get to questions at the end of this presentation. But just to give you guys a quick recap on some stuff we've covered already, I'd like to give you a pop quiz. So how do you effectively track time across multiple tickets simultaneously? This is something that we talked about previously. I know a couple of you guys had some questions on it and I was able to answer them earlier. So let's hope we can get that information synced up pretty easily. All right, excellent. So looking at the questions we have, it looks like just about everyone is answering the question correctly. We're looking at a solid 83%. So just to move on with this question, it's going to be, the time entry. So having time entries is going to be a great way to do that. We also mentioned doing time sheets as another great option, and doing the stopwatch. So this was kind of a fool you question. Really, we wanted to just make sure that everyone is able to enter time as effectively as they can with their company's process. And again, having those work types is important as well. So the next question, based on some information we've already covered, is going to be what time should be listed on your timesheet. We do think that it's important that the proper time is added to every timesheet for whenever they're ready to be reviewed. Okay, so everyone so far has answered this correctly, so I'll just kind of blaze right through this. We want to make sure that all time is entered on the timesheet. Again, this is really important because anything that we're doing in reference to our business is going to be important to have on our timesheets. It's just going to keep us accountable every minute of every day, so then we can have those reports that are really bolstered by all that data later on when we want to review them. I also think it's important to make sure that that time's entered appropriately, even if we're not looking at the reports, because then we'll have that backfill of data as well. So just to briefly give you guys our agenda for what we're going to be covering in section 1-2, we're going to be creating some meaningful statuses. So truly understanding what kind of status we need to put on these service boards when we're working with our clients. We're going to be prioritizing what types of tickets need to be worked, so making sure the right tickets are being completed first versus having our team cherry pick. Recognizing how tickets are created via the email. This is going to be really important if you're new to creating service boards, or if you're trying to branch out additional service boards. We really want to make sure that you have all that functionality when our clients are emailing in our tickets. Again, we want to actually understand arranging all tasks as tickets or any form of communication that we can put onto our calendar later on. It's going to be really important down the road. So just identifying what potentials we have when creating tickets in Manage is going to be huge. Planning the schedules based on your calendar. We've talked about some features within the My Calendar previously, but we really want to drill home how important it is to work from your calendar, especially if you have an office that might be transitioning into work from home or a lot of admin work within the office. And again, we want to just show you some additional ways to create those tickets, update tickets, and even close them, because we really want you to be the champion of all time, all the time, on time, and your life is your calendar within Manage for your service teams. So just jumping in, we do have a quick business case. So my team is completing their time entries effectively. When the time is entered on a ticket, we are running into problems with the ticket not getting tracked throughout the full life cycle. So we might have some issues that things are getting dropped off. Maybe our clients aren't being notified as we progress with this ticket. So we want to make sure to identify a meaningful process around ticket statuses. This is going to be really the bread and butter when you're interacting with your clients through a service board, is making sure that you have those ticket statuses that are going to be able to alert them of where the ticket is throughout the process, and even your own technicians. Let's say a client has entered in, any documentation that your technicians might have needed to progress with that ticket. We want to be able to let them know as well where the ticket falls to make sure that they can provide that additional service. So anytime we're updating the statuses on a service ticket, it's going to actually be from the service board setup table. This is going to be where we create all of our statuses per service board. We would recommend, of course, having different service boards for different teams, depending on what their processes are, because when we build out these statuses, we want to make sure that they are process based. We don't really want a lot of clutter on our service board statuses, because it's going to really make the difference between our teams being able to identify the right status versus the wrong status. Just a quick example as to why you wouldn't want to have the wrong status placed on accident is if you have workflow rules or anything in addition built upon those statuses, they might get missed when the wrong status is applied. So again, another key feature is going to be the escalation statuses. This is really important because it's going to tie our statuses and the ticket progress to our SLAs. So making sure that the proper SLA stage is set per that status is going to be huge moving forward with providing the proper level of service to your clients. So just some common statuses that we see are going to be, a new, scheduled, in progress. These are very typical to let your clients know where the ticket is within that progress. Again, you'll see that they don't have to be extremely long statuses. They really just need to be clear and something that can be defined by any member of the team that would be using that service board. So it might be a really smart move to have the key players when you're building out these service boards added in when you are creating those statuses to make sure that everyone can recognize what pieces of the process need to be added in order for that team to be successful. Now, I did mention that each of these statuses can also have notifications set on them, and this can be set for either internal members or external members, sometimes even both. So this is one of the key players to why having effective status notifications on a service board is going to be critical for moving forward within Manage. So just making sure that the proper notification is set out, even if we use one of the examples from our previous slide, so scheduled. This essentially just lets our clients know that we have a technician that has been scheduled onto this ticket and is going to be able to work on it moving forward. We can have additional details added into that status notification, letting them know who that technician might be, or some additional features that they might need for that request. So if this is a service board that typically needs additional content, maybe a number of licenses that are going to be used, or any key indicators to be successful with completing that ticket, you can add that information as a notification on the status. And so again, the best way to get these notifications out to the right people is going to be through the email notifications. We do have a lot of great documentation on our university that outlines what each of these mean. Typically, you will see maybe a contact for this item or primary contact. This would either mean that it's the main resource or the main client that's attached to that ticket. So it's really important to flesh out all of these notifications based on what you're looking for that service board. Again, just some common notifications that would be tied to statuses is going to be maybe the scheduled, new. Really think of the status notification as a way to guide yourself as the technician or your client through that whole ticket process. And it keeps everyone accountable as you move forward. Some of these can be tied to workflow rules. Even if you get a little deeper into the notifications, maybe you can have a waiting on client response, 1, 2, depending on the severity of the board where that issue might have fallen. So we do have some additional features added into the ticket status and notifications. There is a fully fleshed out HTML that can be offered. You can also add in these tokens. The tokens, in my opinion, are going to be the biggest move forward in making sure that the process is completely streamlined for your clients. When we have the proper tokens added in, it is going to parse that data from the ticket itself to give that directly to your client without you having to go through these notifications every time and reset whatever information might be needed. So in this example, we're going to have that contact first name, last name added in directly and that ticket number. So it just kind of gives them that more personal feel every time they get one of these tickets entered in. So again, the tokens do pull those variables from the tickets themselves. There is a very large body of variables that are available. You can just go ahead and search through that and then click directly onto the token to add it into the status. This is going to be the best way, in my opinion. If I'm trying to add new variables, I would just search directly right above on that search line, because then it gives me kind of a better scope of what's available. Again, we do have a lot of documentation that fleshes out what each and every token has to offer when you are creating those different statuses. So just a quick pop quiz. Statuses are used for all of the following except. I'll give you guys just a quick bit of time here. Looks like everyone's killing it. I guess I might have made these questions a little too easy for you guys, but we're just starting you off. Again, this is only section 1, 2, so hopefully we can ramp it up a little later on. Looks like everyone is answering this correctly, so we'll go ahead and move on from here. It's going to be automatic time entry. Now, I do think it was important to stress that the status is not used for automatic time entry. While there are a bunch of different options on getting that status applied to that ticket, maybe let's say from the calendar list view, it will not enter time just because we set a specific status. So making sure that that time entry is fully fleshed out, maybe utilizing a stopwatch feature, or even the mobile app is a great way if you have technicians that are on the road. Just making sure the time is also attached when we are changing those statuses is going to be important. So a quick business case here. Sometimes our service boards get a little backed up. Our technicians are all hands on deck, but we need to have a way to make sure that they're working on the most important tickets first. So briefly, I did mention SLAs, and this is really where they come into play, is making sure that the proper ticket is completed first versus just your technicians cherry picking off of the service board. When we have the right tickets completed first, we can actually get those urgent issues out the door right away and provide that top level service for our clients that keep our relationship as their MSP vendor strong and keep them kind of along for the ride the whole time. So a great way that we can kind of isolate what important issues need to be handled first is by filtering from the service board itself. So as you can see on the screenshot, we have a service board that is just full of information. It might be a little hard to parse out without having some additional filters. So you see, there's over 300 hits on this board, but we need to be able to have some action moving forward. I would recommend, in this example, we're just trying to see which ticket is not assigned to a resource. This is just going to be a great way to kind of filter out what issues are not being hit by an SLA. How can we get our team more accountable on these issues that haven't been touched yet? And you can see with this example, it's not just issues at the top, it's kind of staggered. So this might be a key factor for us to look into later. Why is our team trying to avoid these issues? Is there something in our process we need to fix? Maybe we need to have some additional retraining on these specific issues. But nevertheless, the best way I would recommend that we filter these out is by making a view. So some interesting facts on the view, you can actually pull in the information from that service board just by filtering those different fields. So let's say we set a specific priority or we set a specific company into that field itself. When we click into define the view, we can actually choose load current filters. This is just a quick little tidbit I always like to display when we're talking about making views, because it kind of makes the view process a lot more simplistic. We don't have to go through those different fields. So in this example, of course, we are just showing one that has a empty resource field. So this is going to provide our team a quick glance at the full service board at what tickets don't have a resource. Views themselves can be set to specific members or for everyone to see. So this is really great if, let's say, you are a top level manager and you have specific information you're trying to parse out. You can have your own views. But if let's say you have a team of dispatchers, maybe you would want to give them specific views with a view name that makes sense that anyone can understand it just by the name itself. So now that we've set that view onto this grouping, we can see that we have a lot less results that came back. Again, we are still kind of high on the number of results, so we might want to kind of file down that view a little farther. This is going to be really important towards fitting manage to match your own business practices. Again, whatever views you're setting are going to be specific to what results you're trying to find. So again, it really gives you that critical information a lot faster by utilizing the views. Another thing I'd like to point out, since we are talking about the service board list view, is going to be the list view configuration. This is a big one in my opinion, especially if you are using something like custom fields, which we will discuss later on down the road. You can actually set those fields to be visible at the list view setup table. So whenever we are in the configuration here, we can choose what columns are going to display and in what order. This is going to be per workstation, if I believe correctly. So again, you want to tailor this more towards your own settings. Another thing that I think is pretty important is, let's say we have a monitor within our own office. We can set the service board with these specific views and the view configuration, so then everyone is alerted of what our service board is looking like at that time. So it's just a really great way to filter out what kind of information we want to place on there. Maybe we won't want to show all of the in progress tickets, as our team is already aware that those are being worked on, because they should have them on their calendars. So these are just really some ways to make sure that you're keeping accountable via statuses. So you want to make sure that your statuses align with the scheduled resource that's set, and that the tickets are scheduled in statuses that don't have a resource pass date. So again, we really want to make sure that, while we've built out these perfect statuses to match our process, they're actually being followed whenever we have resources assigned and our tickets are being worked until the completion there. So when we are looking at this service board list, we can use the scheduled column for additional accountability. I really like to highlight the features that are on this column because it kind of gives us at a glance where the ticket might be in the process, and it lets us know if our statuses are being respected. So, if we see the fifth one down that there is a resource scheduled in the past, we might want to look into that and see, okay, does our status match, what is set for a resource schedule in the past? Why is this ticket not being followed up on, etc. But it's just really important to highlight which each of these icons can provide you. Another quick tip that I think is really important about the schedule column is the calendar icon that you see, the third one down. It says that there is a resource scheduled for today. You can actually click on that icon and it'll pull up the resources calendar. This is just a really great way to see, where this resource is going to be working on this ticket, what other information they have set for that day, if they might have any time to work on that ticket earlier based on their availability. It's just a really great way to get some additional features from that service board list view. Another one that I think is important at a glance is just the no resource assigned to a ticket. It's very easy to parse that information out on that list view because it's the only circular one, and it kind of pops out at you. So whenever you see something like that, you can campaign towards getting your technicians assigned and getting that issue out the door. So just a quick pop quiz is going to be, how do you filter the service board screen to find tickets without any assigned resources? I can give you guys just a couple of moments here to answer this question. Okay, yeah, so we're looking pretty good. We got about an 85% rate on this one for the answer. Of course, that is going to be views. So currently what we've just shown you is that you can create customized views for your service board list view in order to parse out specific information you want to have. So the views themselves are not tied only to the service board list. This can be any list within the system. You can make views for companies, for contacts. So really anywhere that you need to parse out some additional information on a list view, use that view setting, and then you can really streamline the system to match your own business cases. So when we have some departments that still utilize the Outlook integration as their main source of work, it kind of becomes a challenge for our team to be able to transition into Manage as the one source of truth. So it's going to be really important that we kind of stress having everything as a ticket moving forward. So even though we still have some team members that are using Outlook as their main source, we want to tell them that, having a ticket in Manage is going to be really the path moving forward. And again, you really want to campaign for this as a company department-wide change, because when everyone else is doing it, it's a lot easier for that change to happen. So just some, incentives as to why you would want to have a ticket for everything within your system. Any client requests, phone calls, everything should be a ticket within Manage. Because again, all this calls, these emails, it's related to your company. So we want to be able to track that and have better accountability moving forward. Because I know, I've had personally where emails might fall on the wayside when I reach out to someone where they might not have had that as a ticket. So just making sure that those service tickets are in the system, it really lets you kind of expand on all the offerings that Manage has, including tracking that time, how much time was spent on, getting that issue resolved versus just an email back and forth. Recording what responses you've gotten from those customers. It's really important from a service perspective, because when we have this full system that's going to show all of our service tickets that have been completed. We can actually help train our Tier 1 technicians based on issues that have already come into the system. Again, it's a great way to collect that documentation. We're kind of treating Manage as a historical record when we have all of this information in as a ticket. And of course, we can invoice time directly from Manage. There's not going to be any issue with time being lost or additional time being rendered for free because it wasn't added into Manage, because we're entering that time directly on that ticket, and then we can invoice from the tickets themselves in Manage. So really, we want to make sure that everything is going to be a ticket moving forward, no matter what it is. The way I like to think of it is, if you're doing something that's going to impact the business, it should probably be a ticket. It should be within Manage. And there are some easy ways to transition from, an Outlook-focused worker to Manage. They could forward any of those emails that they get directly to a service board, and then they can work on the ticket from there after they update the company and contact. There's some great ways to get that stuff kind of automated. In addition to that, when they add the ticket in to Manage, you can set a status with a status notification that says, we are transitioning to a ConnectWise Manage focused ticketing system. Please email our support desk for any additional services moving forward. Because as this is going to also transition not only our team members but our clients into having everything created as a ticket versus them maybe sending an email to their favorite resource. So just a quick pop quiz. So what does the right-facing green arrow on the service board screen schedule column indicate? Now I know we did talk about the other option, the red-facing arrow, so this one should be pretty apparent here. Okay, answers are coming in pretty hot. Okay, awesome. So it looks like just about everyone has gotten this answer right. And it's going to be that there is a scheduled resource in the future. So it's really important to utilize that scheduled column just at a glance to make sure that our statuses, our tickets are being handled properly. Whenever we are able to match up a schedule column, icon to the status that the board, that the ticket's on, it's going to be a really great feeling moving forward, because all the effort that we're putting into making sure everything is a ticket is being followed when we see it in practice. So just a quick business case here. So we have members that work both in the field and in the office. Since we have resources in different locations, it can be difficult to standardize the communications and expectations from our clients. So whenever this happens, we really do want to make sure that nothing is dropped. This is a great way to kind of breach the my life is my calendar barrier. So especially when our team is trying to transition from Outlook into Manage itself, instead of utilizing their Outlook calendar, their Outlook email, they would want to use the My Company calendar. This is just going to give them those additional features that we really think is going to be important, not only for them, but the whole service team, especially if you have an office that might be transitioning into a work from home status for a couple of weeks. This is just a really great way to make sure that everyone is held accountable, and it's an easy way to work within the teams while you're not, connected via an office. So, when you fully commit to the calendar, it really streamlines those processes within Manage. So no matter what we have going on, we want to make sure it's on our calendar. Similar to having everything as a ticket, we want to have all of those tickets onto the calendar itself. So here you just see if we have, a technician that might be working remote. This is typically what their calendar might look like, where each different half-hour slot might have a ticket. This will vary depending on the role and the type of work that they might be doing. Maybe they're project-based only. It might just have a large project block on there. But what we want to really stress is that the calendar itself is going to be fully utilized each day. So again, When your calendar is fully utilized, it's a lot easier for the rest of your team to be able to view, what items you might be working on, if you have any additional time for additional workloads, or if they can pull you in for questions on something that they might be working on. It's just a great way to show that you are being accountable during the day and that, the items that you are assigned are being completed. Because you can see on the calendar itself on the left side, there are those icons. Again, within the managed system, there's going to be plenty of icons that let you at a glance see, what status you might be within that ticket process. In this example, we have a couple that still need to be viewed. Whenever time is entered on a ticket, those icons can switch to that little clock. Just another quick way to let you know that, you're being accountable throughout the day. You might have entered the time on those tickets that you've already worked on. Again, this is going to increase that team accountability because we know that issues are being handled, and you can really focus your time management, especially if we have, let's say, a dispatcher that might be having these tickets added to a calendar before someone comes in during the day. It's really important if we have team members that might be working remote. Now they don't have to go to a manager or to that dispatcher to ask, where they need to go, what supplies they need to grab for that day. They can just log into Manage, look at their calendar, and they already know where they should be for that day accordingly. This is also great when you're utilizing the ConnectWise mobile app because you have that full calendar functionality. You can view other people's calendars from that app. So if you're not in the office, you can still be accountable with your team because you have your calendar painted green. So as you can see at the top, there is a color on Andy's. It's going to be green. This just shows you how much their threshold is filled in for a day's workload. This is all going to be customized, within the setup tables for the different colors, and then the thresholds themselves are set up for the members individually. So again, this is really dependent on the type of role this member might be in. So if you have someone who's working on projects, you might not need to have a full 8-hour, or if someone has to do quite a bit of admin, internal work, a full 8-hour day might not be the best as far as their threshold goes. But just making sure that you can see at a glance those different colors, kind of highlight if someone is, fully loaded, needs to have a couple more tickets onto their board. It's just another great way that you can utilize Manage at a glance. It really comes into play when you are dispatching out your team members. You can kind of look at those colors to see, who needs to get that next ticket. Where is that stress load going to be handled the most appropriately with our service team? And like I mentioned, since we are utilizing those calendars to their fullest, it's going to be a great way to unlock some additional features within Manage. So if we have resources added onto a service ticket, let's say that ticket owner calls in, they say that the issue is a lot more impactful than they might have originally thought, and they need to have that issue resolved right away. We can actually look at the resources that are assigned for that day by checking the availability and truly seeing on their calendar if they have space for that issue to be handled. So, if they were not utilizing the calendar to its fullest, we would not be able to see where those empty spots are on their calendar, or we might potentially double book them, which is not only going to, leave a sour taste in our technician's mouth, but it's also going to not reflect well on our client, because while we had an internal error on double booking, the client themselves, they're going to expect to have that issue resolved as soon as possible. So, again, when we utilize this system to its fullest, including the calendars themselves, we can give that client that extra level of understanding and respect for what the agreement is going to be moving forward. So, when the team is frequently multitasking, they're going to need to be able to trust that updates on the tickets are as accurate to represent whatever stage that ticket is throughout the life cycle. So a great way to make sure when a ticket comes onto the board directly, it's updated to the most accurate stage is going to be with an email connector. So use email connectors to automatically update those tickets directly when they're added onto the service board. Whenever we're setting up an email connector, if you are new to this, there's going to be a couple different setup tables that we need to address first. The first one is going to be the IMAP setup table. So I think of it as a 1-to-1. So one IMAP setup table for one email connector setup. And then that email connector can go to its respective service board afterwards. So Of course, these setup tables are found within system setup tables, and then we'll just go to the IMAP setup table. When we're in here, we're going to be adding in the email information itself, so it's login, the different IMAP inbox, and the process folder. So the best way to explain that is that the inbox is going to be where the email comes in first whenever the client has that issue. And then when the email connector or the IMAP setup table sees that issue, it's going to actually move it from the inbox over to that processed folder. Now, mind you, the naming conventions for what each of these folders are going to be is going to be based on what's in your email connector, the actual email itself. So just keep that in mind. A new feature that we did add is going to be that failed folder. This is going to be in relation to kind of stopping some email loops that might have been happening previously. So anytime that there's kind of an issue with an email where it won't go from the inbox over to processed, it'll actually move into that failed folder. So then it'll kind of eliminate some of that issue and give your client a better example on your services versus having a loop. So just a great addition to the IMAP setup tables. Note, the IMAP setup table might not be appropriate for every situation. If you have a very specific situation related to, Office 365 emails and an Azure ID account, you will need to go to a different setup table. Other than that, the IMAP setup table is going to be excellent for, anything from your Gmails, Outlook, etc. So after we have that set up, you're actually going to pull that information into an email connector setup table. And you'll notice at the top left corner, we can actually see that IMAP setup table that we've set up previously. We'll just have to add that in there. And then the email connector setup table is going to give you some additional features whenever we're adding those tickets onto the service board. I really think it's important to fully flesh out the email connector setup table because some of this functionality that we're getting here, it's going to set those defaults so our team might not have to set them down the road, and it'll just kind of bolster our reporting because it's just another spot that we can make sure that that data is actually being added in, even if it's something that needs to be changed moving forward. So a great one that I think's, a requirement is going to be that default company. So this is in the event we have a, email or a ticket that comes in for a company that wasn't able to be parsed through by the email connector. We can set a default, in this case, a catch-all company. So then our team, as that ticket's getting dispatched, can make sure that it's assigned to the correct company, the correct contact, or, if it's an example on a, new client that came in, we can actually address that because we notice that it's a catch-all and that record isn't being attached to any companies within our system. Again, setting that default priority I think is really important. It's just one of those things that, since it can be set here, I would, campaign that we probably should because it's going to give us those additional defaults. You can also set the different types, subtypes, and items. Even if it's going to be one that's a must change, it's important in my opinion to just have that set from ground up because then we at least have some kind of data when we're moving forward into maybe looking at the type, subtype, item reports. Those reports, if you're not looking at them now, do provide a lot of value for your team and your clients in light of, creating additional processes that could be updated and just understanding what kind of issues your clients might be facing. And again, following the example, if we have a catch-all company ticket that came in, you can actually create a contact if they don't exist based on the settings on your email connector setup table. And of course, posting those customer replies to the original ticket, this kind of bleeds in well with our business case that we were mentioning. So as the client might update that ticket, we can just get that information routed directly into the service ticket versus having to hunt for, what stage in the process that service ticket is on. And again, you can also increase that automation with the email connector because we're able to set all of that information up on the email connector. So from here, of course, you would just tie it to whatever service board respectively and give the client that email address so that they can move forward with any tickets within your team. And so, like we mentioned earlier, if you were going to kind of create a new status for campaigning your clients towards emailing to an email connector versus your clients, you would want to set that as a status. Maybe you can set that as the default status on the email connector. Again, this is truly up to your process, but you can really update that information from the statuses themselves. and to kind of layer on the, benefits of having that email connector set, you can set the email address for each individual status or even the closed loop notifications on a service board to that email connector address. So anytime they reply, they're becoming familiar with that email connector address versus your own technician's emails. So it's just a great way to kind of help train your technicians into utilizing the email connector and your clients. So just something to note, when we are utilizing that email connector, any subject line that the email connector is going to parse is going to have this in the field. Any of those options are going to work for the email connector to parse it, but without that information, it's not going to be able to set that email to the correct ticket. So just making sure that's going to be attached to any of your subject lines for your statuses is going to really help streamline that process. So just keep that in mind when we are building out those statuses. We do have documentation that offers quite a few other options for what can be set within that status. So go ahead and take a look. Whatever is going to be most appropriate for your business is what you'd want to add into that subject line. And so just to take a look at some effective ticket handling, you'll want to make sure that that enter time record is going to be checked whenever we are working on those service tickets, and that the charge to field is going to have the right service ticket in question. Again, this is going to really help us whenever we are making sure to transition our team into only working on service tickets. But making sure that these details are kind of nailed in from the beginning is going to really help us when we want to make sure that we're invoicing from the tickets themselves. It's a lot easier to train the habit now versus try to correct it later on. And again, just making sure that the time details are correct. So including the start time, end time that the technician might have been working on that ticket, and that the work types are appropriate for whatever was being rendered. If this is an after hours ticket, we'll want to make sure that that work type is going to be, after hours versus a regular. But if our technicians are kind of slacking on getting those time entries added in, we can look at them from the timesheet to see where those fields might be empty. And of course, whenever we do make a time entry correctly, it is going to automatically be appended to that timesheet. So we're really not making it difficult for our technicians to get that time entered, so long as they're just entering a closed loop with the notes on what they might have done for that ticket. It's just going to apply right away to the timesheet. And so just a quick pop quiz. The email connectors are used for all of the following except. Okay, this is good. So everyone is definitely paying attention. I really appreciate everyone answering the questions as quickly as possible here. Since we're all pretty much getting this answer right, I am going to move on. So the answer was going to be creating projects. Now, this is kind of a trick question, right? So the email connector setup table itself is not going to allow you to create those projects, but I would campaign depending on what kind of offerings you have for your clients. Maybe you do have a scoping for new business service board. You could have an email connector that pulls in those tickets to that service board, and then you can create the project from that ticket. So yes, you did get this right, but I did want to also kind of open the ideas as to what we can really do with this email connector. So just a quick business case, it seems like it's a constant battle getting your team to work consistently within Manage. Your clients' issues are still getting solved, but we are seeing that the work is not getting documented as often as we want, so we're not able to invoice as effectively. So this, in my opinion, is a huge issue, because if we're not able to invoice for all of the work that we're completing, maybe your technician might have a back and forth with a client through email and they just totally forget about it. Those are going to be hours that we are missing, and essentially our team is not getting paid for. So just making sure to give full access to how to create service tickets is going to be really important moving forward. So just a couple examples here from the service board itself. Whenever you are looking at, from the My Calendar itself, since we are fully utilizing the My Calendar, the calendar is my life, we can actually build out some additional optionality from here. So if we just right click on any ticket, service ticket, project ticket, you name it, we can actually enter time directly from the screen. So it's just a really great way to make sure that maybe a technician gets a quick call from a client and they resolve an issue right on the spot. They can just right from the My Calendar enter that time as quickly as possible to get that ticket sent in. And they can also change the status of the ticket to maybe a resolve status or waiting on client directly from the screen as well, just to give them as much functionality as possible to fully utilizing these service tickets. Of course, whenever they're entering that time, they are going to get that time entry window where they can check, is this record going to be billed? Are my billing statuses correct? Like work type, is the amount of time I'm trying to bill for set correctly? And did I make sure to change that status? So it's really just some additional functionality that we're offering for those technicians that might be struggling on getting these service tickets as a part of their day-to-day. But wait, there's more. From the screen and virtually any screen within Manage, there's actually a new drop-down in the top left. I don't think this gets as much love as it deserves because no matter what role we're in, we can actually create new items for virtually every role. So if you see from this screen here, we can actually create new service tickets if there's a new issue that came in, or right below it, we can actually do new time entries. So it's really important if we're doing a new time entry from, this option that we set it to the right service ticket so that it's going to be billed out properly, maybe onto that right agreement. So, like I mentioned, it's really important to update these tickets, let your clients know what's going on as soon as possible, and just making it as easy as possible for your team to transition is going to be the biggest way. Because if you can campaign towards most of your team utilizing, your calendar as your life, it's going to be really great moving forward, especially like I mentioned, if we are going to be having a lot of our teams maybe working off-site for a little while, having everyone's calendar up to date is going to be the best way to keep everyone accounted for. And so just some quick key takeaways before we wrap up for today. Just understanding the importance of tickets and priority. So like I mentioned, the tickets themselves, just at a fundamental level, making sure that they're in Manage is going to be step one. And then moving forward from there, after we've trained our whole team to utilize service tickets throughout, we want to make sure that they are respecting the different statuses that we have so that our priorities are going to be respected and that our clients are going to be kept up to date as that ticket progresses. We don't want to leave our clients in the dark so that they don't hold as much respect to us as an MSP because they might not think that we're resolving their issues as quickly as possible. Again, planning with a schedule and utilizing My Calendar is going to be critical when we're working on these teams, especially when these teams are sharing a service board. We want to make sure that everyone's doing their fair share, whether it's based on the different users. Fully capacity on the My Calendar, just making sure that people are fully utilized throughout the day is really important. And again, creating value with statuses via the email connector is just another quick way that we can get those tickets created, whether it's from our clients sending in the emails directly to the email connector for our team to work, or if our technicians themselves have emails from clients, they can go ahead and forward that into the email connector and then change that process over to utilizing Manage and service boards respectively. So again, thank you guys so much for joining today, for completing section 1 and section 2. As far as time for questions go, I believe that we are getting pretty close to the deadline, but I will go ahead and take a look at our Q&A section and see what we have going on here. I do really appreciate everyone taking a look at this certification today. I also wanted to mention that these are going to be recorded for anyone that was wondering. We will have some documentation on the forums as we progress for what forums we are going to be hosting, all the information where you can ask additional questions while we aren't online, and for any of you that might be in the UK or abroad and can't see these live, you can see the certifications on those forums as well. Let's see here. So I did see a question about the coursework. Of course, we would recommend if you have any time to complete that coursework, that'll be a great way to kind of, bolster what we might be working on during that day and just kind of solidifying the information that you might have learned, throughout this whole certification. So I would keep that in your back pocket. Anytime you have some time to take a look at it, I would recommend it. But yes, that coursework is going to be considered optional. The main content that's going to be for you to understand, that's going to be on the quiz later on, is going to be what we cover within the certification video itself. And so I have some questions on where to find the coursework. So when you're looking at your Adobe Connect, on the left, I believe right above your Q&A section, there's going to be some webinar links. This is going to show you, the blueprints for what session we're on, and then that coursework respectively. As we move forward, we'll probably add some additional links based on the content that we're talking about for that day. If you guys want to look into that a little bit more, maybe something might have sparked your interest, we'll probably have some links in there for you as well. Okay, excellent. So I'm not really seeing any more additional questions. I just wanted to thank you all again for coming into the certification today, and we look forward to seeing you guys again on Wednesday at the same time. Thank you guys so much.